I never thought I'd be starting over at 83. The day Mercer told me he was leaving, I was arranging wildflowers in the antique crystal vase his mother had given us for our wedding in 1964. 60 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories, all of it suddenly meant nothing. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he said, his voice steady as if he were discussing the weather forecast. "Octavia makes me feel young again." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Octavia, his 38-year-old physiotherapist. As he spoke, I noticed the diamond-studded watch on his wrist, a gift I'd never seen before. My fingers trembled slightly, but I continued arranging the peonies and sage. "I see," I replied, sliding the last stem into place. "And when do you plan to leave?" He seemed surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. Instead, I simply asked, "Do you have enough clean underwear packed?" His expression was priceless. That night, after he left for Octavia's downtown loft, I sat alone in our riverside Victorian home and made a single phone call to our family, attorney. 3 days later, I had transferred $7 million in assets to accounts solely in my name. My name is Winifred Thornfield, though everyone calls me Winnie. For 6 decades, I defined myself as Mercer Thornfield's devoted wife. I was the woman who typed his doctoral dissertation in 1966, who hosted dinner parties for university donors when he became department chair, who raised our children when his research kept him in distant archives for months at a time. I was the faithful keeper of our life together, preserving each memory in albums that now line the bookshelves of a house he no longer wants. It wasn't always like this. We met in graduate school at Briarcliff University. I was studying medieval literature while Mercer was pursuing his doctorate in antiquities preservation. He was brilliant, passionate, with those intense amber eyes that seemed to see the world differently than anyone else. Our courtship was a whirlwind of late-night discussions about Chaucer and ancient preservation techniques, stolen kisses in the university library stacks, and promises of a future where we would build something extraordinary together. When he proposed on the stone bridge overlooking Caldwell River, I believed I was living inside one of the romance novels I secretly adored. Our early years together were modest, but blissful. We rented a small apartment near campus while Mercer finished his dissertation and I taught at a local girls' preparatory academy. We couldn't afford much, but we were rich in dreams. Our firstborn, Imogen, arrived the same year Mercer received his first major research grant. Twins Thaddeus and Eleonora followed 3 years later, just as Mercer's career began its meteoric rise. His innovative techniques for preserving ancient manuscripts caught the attention of prestigious institutions worldwide. Soon he was traveling extensively, leaving me to manage our growing family. I didn't mind, not really. I had always believed in his work, in its importance to cultural heritage. When he called from Rome or Istanbul, exhausted but exhilarated by some new discovery, I felt proud to be his anchor, the steady force that enabled his brilliance to shine. I put my own academic aspirations aside without resentment. After all, isn't that what love meant? Supporting your partner's dreams, even at the expense of your own? As the children grew, so did our prosperity. Mercer's consulting work for museums and private collections became increasingly lucrative. By our 30th anniversary, we had purchased the historic Thornfield House, a stately Victorian mansion overlooking Caldwell River with 6 bedrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookcases, and gardens that became my pride and joy. I spent years restoring those gardens, creating a sanctuary of heirloom roses, hidden benches, and winding paths where grandchildren would later play hide-and-seek during summer visits. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No 60-year union could be, but I believed we had weathered our storms. There was the difficult period when Mercer turned 50 and became inexplicably distant, throwing himself into a restoration project in Greece. that kept him away for nearly a year. There was the financial worry when Thaddeus needed specialized medical treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. There were the inevitable disagreements about children's education, holiday traditions, retirement, plans. But always, we found our way back to each other. Or so I thought. The first sign something was wrong came during our 59th anniversary celebration. Our children had arranged a surprise dinner at Gardenia, the upscale restaurant where Mercer had once proposed a second time on our 25th anniversary. Everyone was there. Imogen with her husband Stellan and their 3 children. Thaddeus, recently divorced but in good spirits. Eleonora and her wife Dahlia with their adopted twins. It should have been perfect. But throughout the evening, Mercer kept checking his phone, his expression alternating between anxiety and secretive pleasure. When I asked if everything was all right, he mentioned something vague about a delicate acquisition for the university museum where he still consulted despite being officially retired. That night, I woke to find his side of the bed empty. From the bathroom came the murmur of his voice, speaking softly into his phone. "I miss you too," he whispered. "Soon, I promise." I closed my eyes before he returned, pretending to be asleep, as he slipped back under the covers. For the first time in our marriage, I felt truly afraid. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I checked his phone while he was showering. The evidence was there in black and white, hundreds of messages between Mercer and someone named heart emojis. Intimate photographs, plans, promises. The most recent message had been sent at 3:17 a.m. "I've spoken with my attorney. Everything is in motion." I replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it and went downstairs to prepare breakfast as usual. Poached eggs, sourdough toast, and the strong black tea Mercer preferred. I moved through the routine like an automaton, my mind racing. What did "everything is in motion" mean? Was he planning to leave me? Divorce me? After 60 years? It seemed inconceivable. For the next 3 months, I said nothing. Instead, I observed. I noticed how Mercer suddenly had faculty meetings 3 evenings a week, despite being emeritus. I noticed new clothes appearing in his wardrobe. Slim-cut trousers and fitted shirts that looked nothing like his usual tweed and Oxford cloth. I noticed how he became protective of his phone, taking it even to the bathroom. And I noticed the subtle ways he began to criticize me. My appearance, my outdated interests, my reluctance to travel. Little barbs that, had they come from anyone else, would have seemed insignificant, but from Mercer felt like tiny daggers sliding between my ribs. During this time, I also did something else I had never done. I began to take stock of our finances. Over the decades, I had left the money management entirely to Mercer. He was the brilliant one, after all. I signed whatever documents he placed before me, trusting implicitly that he was making decisions in our best interest. Now I began to educate myself. I made appointments with our bank, our investment advisor, and our accountant, claiming I was getting my affairs in order due to my advancing age, a reason no one questioned. What I discovered shocked me. While we were certainly comfortable, our financial situation wasn't as secure as I had believed. Mercer had been making increasingly risky investments over the past 2 years. He had taken out a substantial home equity line of credit against Thornfield House. Most concerning of all, he had recently updated his will, removing me as the primary beneficiary of his retirement accounts and insurance policies. Instead, these assets would go into a trust that I would have limited access to, a trust with a co-trustee whose name I didn't recognize, Octavia Renweller. I also discovered something else, something that would later prove to be my salvation. When Mercer's father passed away 20 years earlier, he had left a significant inheritance not to Mercer, but to me. To ensure my daughter-in-law's security regardless of circumstances, the will had stated. At the time, I thought it a strange provision. Why not leave it directly to his son? Mercer had been hurt by this perceived lack of trust, but his father, was a shrewd old man who had lived through his own share of heartbreak. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The inheritance had been placed in a separate account with my name alone, and over the years, with compound interest and prudent management, it had grown substantial. Mercer had largely forgotten about it, and I rarely thought of it myself, considering it part of our shared resources. Now, I was profoundly grateful for my late father-in-law's foresight. I made no withdrawals from this account, wanting nothing to alert Mercer to my investigations. Instead, I continued my charade of blissful ignorance, all while preparing for the storm I knew was coming. It arrived on a perfect spring morning, 60 years and 1 day after we had exchanged our vows. As I arranged those wildflowers, peonies from our garden, where Mercer had once built me a reading bench under the maple tree, he stood in the doorway of our sunroom, suitcases already packed in the hall behind him. "Winnie," he said, using my name instead of the endearments, my love, my heart, that had peppered our decades together. "We need to talk." I continued arranging the flowers, though my hands had begun to tremble. "About what, dear?" "About us. About the future." He cleared his throat, his amber eyes, once so captivating to me, now unable to meet mine. "I've decided to make a change." "A change in your diet? You know Dr. Laswell said your cholesterol needs attention." "No, Winnie, a change in my life. In our lives." He paused, then delivered the blow without further preamble. "I've fallen in love with someone else. She makes me feel alive again, vibrant. She understands my passions in a way you never could." I remained silent, placing a sprig of sage precisely between 2 pink peonies. "Her name is Octavia. She's a physiotherapist at the University Wellness Center. We met when I was having treatment for my shoulder last year. She's extraordinary, Winnie, brilliant, compassionate." "And how old is Octavia?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He hesitated. "She's 38. 45 years younger than you, practically a child." I trimmed a stem that was slightly too long. "Age is just a number when souls connect," he said, with the kind of pseudo-philosophical platitude that the Mercer I had married would have mocked mercilessly. "We share the same vision for the future." "And what future is that?" "Travel. Research. Adventure. Building something new." His voice gained enthusiasm as he spoke, as if he were describing a particularly exciting research grant. "She has innovative ideas about cultural preservation techniques that align perfectly with my work." "I see. And where does this grand vision take place? Here at Thornfield House?" He looked uncomfortable for the first time. "That's something we need to discuss. The house. It might be best to sell it. It's too large for one person and the maintenance costs." "Are you leaving today?" I interrupted, finally looking directly at him. Despite everything, the sight of him still made my heart ache. His tall frame now slightly stooped, his once dark hair completely silver, the lines around his eyes that I had once traced with my fingertips in our bed. Yes. Octavia has a loft downtown. I'll be staying there while we sort things out. My attorney will be contacting you about the division of assets. I want to be fair, Winnie. You'll be taken care of." I nodded, placing the final flower in the arrangement. "Do you have enough clean underwear packed?" The question clearly caught him off guard. Of all the responses he had anticipated, tears, rage, pleading, practical concern about his undergarments wasn't among them. Yes, I believe so." "Good, you always forget to pack enough. And your prescription medicine? You have that?" "Yes, I have everything I need." He looked almost disappointed by my calm. "Then I won't keep you." I moved past him into the hallway, noting the 3 large suitcases and 2 boxes labeled Essential Research. So much of his life already removed from our home. I imagine Octavia is waiting. He followed me, seemingly unsettled by my composure. Winnie, I know this is a shock, but in time, you'll see this is better for both of us. You can pursue your own interests now. Your garden club, your book groups. You'll have freedom. Freedom, I repeated, tasting the word. After 60 years, that's your parting gift to me? For a moment, his certainty wavered. I never meant to hurt you. Yet, here we are. I opened the front door. Goodbye, Mercer. After he left, I sat in my sunroom for hours, watching the play of light through the stained glass panels we had salvaged from a demolished church in Portsmouth. When dusk fell, I picked up the phone and called Rhiannon Blackwood, an attorney who had once been Imogen's roommate at university. Winnie, what a lovely surprise, she said. I need your help, Rhiannon. Mercer has left me for another woman. There was a moment of stunned silence. I'm so sorry. What can I do? Everything, I replied. I need to secure my future, tonight. Over the next 3 days, Rhiannon became my guide through the labyrinth of marital assets, property law, and financial protection. We discovered that while Mercer had been planning his exit, he had already begun liquidating certain investments and transferring funds to new accounts I had no access to. He had also been systematically removing items from the house, family heirlooms, artwork, rare books, presumably to his office at the university, beyond my immediate reach. This is methodical, Rhiannon said grimly, reviewing the financial records spread across my dining room table. He's been planning this for at least a year. What can I do? I asked. More than he thinks, she replied with a determined smile. While Mercer had indeed made changes to our shared accounts, he had made a critical oversight. Many of our most valuable assets, our investment portfolio, the vacation property in Harbor Springs, the annuities that provided our retirement income, were still in both our names. As a joint account holder, I had every legal right to access and manage these assets. He probably assumed you wouldn't act quickly, Rhiannon explained. People in his position often count on shock and emotional distress to give them time to finalize their arrangements. He doesn't know me as well as he thinks, I said quietly. Under Rhiannon's guidance, I transferred $7 million from our joint accounts to new accounts solely in my name. I updated the ownership documents for our Harbor Springs cottage, removing Mercer as a beneficiary. I contacted our investment manager and redirected our quarterly dividend payments. And I filed to become the sole owner of Thornfield House, leveraging a quirk in the original purchase agreement that gave precedence to the primary resident in case of separation. When Mercer's attorney called 3 days later, expecting to dictate terms to a devastated old woman, he was instead met with Rhiannon's poised professional resistance. Mrs. Thornfield has already secured her interests in the marital assets, she informed him. We are prepared to negotiate a fair settlement, but please be advised that any assets removed from the family home prior to formal divorce proceedings will be subject to recovery actions. The attorney, clearly caught off guard, promised to confer with his client and call back. When he did, his tone had changed significantly. Dr. Thornfield is concerned about the recent financial transactions, he began. As was Mrs. Thornfield when she discovered her husband's systematic liquidation of assets over the past year, Rhiannon countered smoothly, not to mention the changed beneficiary designations on the insurance policies. There was a telling pause. He's prepared to be generous in the settlement. That's no longer necessary, Rhiannon replied. Mrs. Thornfield has secured what is rightfully hers. We'll have our proposal ready next week. After she hung up, Rhiannon turned to me with a hint of admiration. Mercer is in for quite a surprise. Most people in your position are too emotionally devastated to act so decisively. I thought about the wildflowers I had been arranging when my 60-year marriage ended, how I had continued placing each stem just so, even as my world collapsed around me. I've had practice carrying on through difficult circumstances, I said simply. The next challenge was telling our children. I decided to gather them all at Thornfield House, rather than sharing the news individually. On a Sunday afternoon, they arrived with their usual chaos of grandchildren, food containers, and overlapping conversations. Only when we were all seated in the living room, the younger children dispatched to the garden with popsicles, did I drop my bombshell. Your father has left me for another woman. Her name is Octavia. She's 38 years old, and she's a physiotherapist at the University Wellness Center. The stunned silence was broken by Thaddeus's explosive, "What the actual hell?" Imogen reached for my hand. "Mom, are you okay? When did this happen?" 4 days ago, I replied. He's living in her downtown loft while we sort out the divorce details. Divorce? After 60 years? Eleanora's voice cracked. Dad wouldn't do this? There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, I said gently. He's been planning this for some time. I'll kill him, Thaddeus announced, standing up. I swear to God, I'll kill him. You'll do no such thing, I said firmly. Sit down, Thad. How can you be so calm? Imogen asked, tears streaming down her face. It's unconscionable. I've had 4 days to process the initial shock, I explained. And I've been busy. I outlined the steps I had taken with Rhiannon's help, watching their expressions shift from outrage to amazement. You transferred everything? Eleanora asked, wide-eyed. Not everything, I clarified. Just what was rightfully mine after 60 years of partnership. Your father still has his university pension, his personal accounts, and his precious research grants. But Thornfield House will remain mine, as will the Harbor Springs cottage and approximately half of our investment portfolio. Go, Mom, Thaddeus said with a hint of his usual humor. Remind me never to cross you. Despite their attempt at support, I could see the deeper hurt in my children's eyes. It wasn't just about the money or the practicalities, it was the shattering of their family narrative. The father they had admired, the marriage they had believed in, the family history they had taken pride in. All of it was suddenly revealed to be something else entirely. I know this is painful for all of you, I acknowledged. Your father is still your father. His choices regarding our marriage don't change that. You're adults with your own relationships with him, and I won't ask you to choose sides. But we do choose you, Mom, Imogen said fiercely. You've been our rock while Dad was off changing the world of antiquities preservation. You're the one who never missed a school play or a graduation or a Sunday dinner? I smiled at my firstborn, so like me in her loyalty, so unlike me in her fiery temperament. I appreciate that, sweet girl, but this situation is complicated. Enough without adding family estrangement to it. Your father made a choice that hurt me deeply, but he's still the man who taught you to read ancient Greek, Imogen. He's still the one who supported your coming out, Ellie. And Thad, he's the one who stood by you through your divorce last year. That's rich, considering he was probably already planning his own exit, Thaddeus muttered. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But I've spent 60 years with your father, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people can hold contradictions within themselves. He can be both the brilliant, caring father you've known and the man who left his wife of 60 years for someone younger than his own daughters. After they left, promising to check on me daily, a commitment I knew would gradually fade as their own busy lives reclaimed their attention, I wandered through the rooms of Thornfield House. So many memories in these walls, children's laughter echoing up the grand staircase, holiday gatherings around the dining table that seated 20, quiet evenings reading by the library fireplace while Mercer worked on his manuscripts. 60 years of a shared life. For the first time since Mercer's departure, I allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that left me breathless, curled on the floor of what had been our bedroom. I cried for the young woman I had been, so full of literary dreams and romantic notions. I cried for the middle-aged mother who had mastered the art of explaining her husband's absences at school functions. I cried for the aging wife who had measured her worth by her ability to maintain a beautiful home and support a brilliant man's work. And then, exhausted, I picked myself up off the floor. At 83, this was no small feat. My knees protested, my back ached, and my dignity felt as bruised as my heart. But I stood nonetheless. I washed my face, smoothed my silver hair, and went downstairs to make a cup of tea. As I waited for the kettle to boil, my gaze fell on the bookshelves lining my kitchen wall. Cookbooks collected over decades, some falling apart from use. Without conscious thought, I pulled down Mastering the Art of French Cooking, a wedding gift I had used to prepare countless dinner parties for Mercer's colleagues. Inside the front cover was an inscription: "To Winnie, who masters everything she attempts with grace and determination. The world doesn't yet know your name, but I do. All my love, Mercer." June 14th, 1964. I traced his handwriting, faded but still legible after all these years. The world doesn't yet know your name, but I do. Such confidence in me he had once had, or at least he had expressed. When had that changed? When had I become, in his eyes, merely the reliable backdrop to his brilliant career, rather than a woman worthy of her own story? Perhaps it had happened so gradually that neither of us noticed. Perhaps I had participated in my own diminishment. So eager was I to support his dreams, so conditioned to believe that my fulfillment would come through his success. The kettle whistled, jolting me from my reverie. As I prepared my tea, English breakfast with a splash of milk, the same as I'd had every morning for decades, a strange thought occurred to me. I could have something different tomorrow. Earl Grey, perhaps. Or green tea with honey. Or coffee. After 60 years of catering to Mercer's preferences, I was free to discover my own. It was a small realization, almost laughably trivial given the seismic shifts in my life, and yet it felt profound. What else might I discover about myself now that I was no longer defined as Mercer Thornfield's wife? The next morning, I woke, early, a lifetime habit of rising before the household needed me. But there was no household now, just me in this large, quiet home. I lay in bed, watching the sunrise paint soft colors across the ceiling, and allowed myself the luxury of asking, "What do I want today?" The answer came with surprising clarity. I wanted to reclaim my space. I rose, dressed in comfortable clothes, and began in Mercer's study. His presence lingered here most strongly, books and papers stacked in his particular organizational system, comprehensible only to him, the leather chair worn to the shape of his body, photographs of him receiving awards and honorary degrees dominating the walls. I started small, removing the photographs and storing them carefully in boxes for him to collect later. Then I rearranged the furniture, moving the desk to face the window rather than the door. Over the next week, this process expanded to other rooms. I removed Mercer's clothes from the master bedroom closet, packing them into vacuum bags to preserve them until he wanted them. I replaced his heavy, dark bedside lamp with a delicate stained glass one I'd always admired in a local artisan's shop, but had never purchased because it didn't match our aesthetic. I moved furniture, rehung artwork, and gradually, room by room, Thornfield House began to feel like my home rather than ours. During this time, negotiations between our attorneys continued. Mercer, initially outraged by my financial maneuvers, eventually recognized the precariousness of his position. He had been methodically preparing to leave me with far less than my fair share, and now faced the uncomfortable reality that his plans had been discovered and countered. His attempts to claim I had acted improperly fell flat when Rhiannon presented evidence of his own secretive financial activities over the previous year. 2 weeks after his departure, he requested a meeting. I agreed to see him at a neutral location, a private room at the Briarcliff University Faculty Club, where we had once celebrated his academic achievements together. When I arrived, he was already seated, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. The confident posture that had characterized him throughout our marriage was diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expression uncertain. "Winnie," he said, rising as I entered. "Thank you for coming." "Mercer," I acknowledged, taking the seat across from him. "You're looking well." It wasn't entirely true. Despite his expensive new clothes and freshly trimmed hair, he appeared tired, with dark circles under his eyes that his designer glasses couldn't hide. "You've been busy," he said, a hint of accusation in his tone. "As have you," I replied evenly. "For much longer than I have." He had the grace to look away. "I never intended things to happen this way." "How did you intend them to happen exactly? Were you planning to wait until after our 60th anniversary celebration next month? Or perhaps until after Imogen's 40th birthday in July? What? Was the timeline for discarding 6 decades of marriage?" My calm delivery seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "That's unfair, Winnie. I haven't discarded anything. Our marriage has been over in all but name for years." "That's news to me," I said. "I was quite happily married as of 3 weeks ago." "Were you really? Or were you just comfortable?" He leaned forward. "When was the last time we had a meaningful conversation? When was the last time we shared a genuine moment of connection? We've been living parallel lives for years, Winnie." I considered his words. There was some truth to them. Our relationship had certainly evolved over the decades. The passionate young couple we had been had gradually transformed into comfortable companions, our conversations often limited to practical matters of household management and family obligations. But wasn't that the natural progression of a long marriage? The fiery intensity of youth giving way to something deeper, more enduring? "If you felt disconnected, you could have said something," I pointed out. "You could have suggested counseling, or planned special time together, or any number of things that didn't involve a woman young enough to be our daughter." "Octavia isn't just some young woman," he said, his voice taking on that dreamy quality I had first heard when he spoke of ancient manuscripts requiring his expert attention. "She understands me in ways you never could. She sees the vision I have for my legacy." "Ah, yes, your legacy. Always your primary concern." He flinched at that. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You spent our entire marriage building your reputation, your career, your name in the field. And I supported you every step of the way. I raised your children, managed your home, edited your manuscripts, hosted your colleagues. I shaped my entire life around your ambitions." "I never asked you to give up your own dreams," he protested. "Didn't you? Not explicitly, perhaps. But every time Imogen had a fever, or Thaddeus needed help with his science project, or Eleonora had a dance recital while you were at a conference in Berlin or Cairo or Tokyo, who did you expect to handle it? When your department chair was coming to dinner and the perfect meal needed to be prepared, who did you look to? When you needed someone to organize your research notes at 2 a.m. because inspiration had struck, who did you wake?" He fell silent, unable to counter these truths. "I made choices, Mercer. I take responsibility for them. But don't pretend you didn't benefit enormously from those choices. Don't pretend your brilliant career would have been possible without me managing everything else in our lives." After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice subdued. "What do you want, Winnie?" "I want what I've already taken. My fair share of our assets and the home I've lived in for 40 years. I want you to explain to our children why their family narrative has suddenly been rewritten. And I want you to acknowledge, at least to yourself, that what you're calling love with Octavia might be nothing more than a desperate attempt to recapture your youth. You don't know her, he said defensively. You don't understand what we have. You're right, I don't, and I don't need to. I rose from my seat. We're done here, Mercer. Our attorneys can handle the rest. Is that it then? 60 years? Ends like this. Division of assets and legal negotiations. I looked at him. This man I had loved for most of my life. This brilliant, selfish, complicated person who had been the center of my world for so long. No, I said softly. 60 years doesn't end. It remains a part of both of us. But what comes next is something entirely different. You've chosen your path forward. Now I'll choose mine. As I walked out of the faculty club, I felt a strange lightness. The grief was still there, the anger too, but alongside them was something unexpected. A sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in decades. Mercer Thornfield's wife had ceased to exist. Winifred Thornfield, however, was just beginning to discover who she might become. The days following my conversation with Mercer at the faculty club took on a peculiar rhythm. Each morning, I woke, with a moment of disorientation, the empty space beside me still startling after 60 years of sharing a bed. Then came a rush of memories, the painful reality of my situation settling over me like a heavy cloak. But as the sun climbed higher, something unexpected happened. The weight gradually lifted, replaced by a curious sense of anticipation. What would this day bring, now that I answered to no one but myself? I began with small explorations of freedom. I rearranged my morning routine, lingering over breakfast with books I'd been meaning to read for years. I switched from English breakfast tea to rich French-pressed coffee. I played Bach loudly through the house's sound system, which Mercer had always considered too distracting during daylight hours. I took long baths in the middle of the afternoon, something I hadn't done since the children were small. Imogen called daily, her concern transparent. "Mom, I'm just checking in. Do you need anything? Do you want me to come over?" "I'm perfectly fine, darling," I assured her, though I appreciated her devotion. "I'm actually quite busy." "Busy? With what?" she asked, suspicious. I hesitated, not wanting to sound frivolous. Rediscovering myself, I suppose. The truth was more complicated than I could explain, even to my perceptive firstborn. I was excavating layers of identity buried beneath decades of compromise. Each day brought small revelations about my preferences, my desires, my authentic self. I discovered I preferred sleeping with the windows open, something Mercer's allergies had always prevented. I found I enjoyed spicy food, which I'd avoided. Cooking because Mercer preferred bland meals. I realized I loved staying up late reading poetry, rather than adhering to the strict 10 p.m. bedtime Mercer had insisted upon for optimal cognitive function. These revelations might seem trivial to someone who hadn't spent 6 decades adjusting to another person's needs and preferences. But to me, each discovery felt momentous, a piece of myself reclaimed from the woman I had become in service to, my marriage. My explorations extended beyond Thornfield House. One Tuesday morning, I drove to Laconia College, a small liberal arts institution in a neighboring town. 60 years earlier, I had been offered a teaching position in their medieval literature department, a position I declined when Mercer received his prestigious research fellowship at Briarcliff. Now, I found myself parking in the visitor lot, walking across a campus alive with young people rushing between classes. The English department was housed in Whittier Hall, a stately brick building with ivy climbing its walls. I hadn't planned what I would do here. Some inexplicable instinct had drawn me to this road not taken. As I stood in the hallway, examining framed photographs of faculty through the decades, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Can I help you find someone?" I turned to face a woman perhaps 20 years my junior, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes bright behind tortoiseshell glasses, I'm not sure, I admitted. I was offered a position here once, long ago, in medieval literature. Her eyebrows rose with interest. When was this? 1964. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Well before my time, but fascinating. I'm Cordelia, Winter's department chair. Would you like to come to my office for tea? I'd love to hear your story. Over Earl Grey and shortbread cookies, I told Cordelia about my academic background, my specialization in women's voices in medieval texts, and the fellowship that had drawn Mercer and me away from Laconia. She listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that revealed her own expertise in the field. You know, she said when I'd finished, we have a community scholars program. Distinguished individuals with academic backgrounds who want to participate in university. Life without the pressures of full-time teaching. They attend seminars, give occasional guest lectures, mentor students. We even provide office space. And you think I might qualify? I asked, surprised. With your background? Absolutely. Your dissertation on feminine agency in Chaucer was groundbreaking for its time. She smiled at my astonishment. Yes, I looked you up in our archives while getting the tea. We still have your application and CV. Your work was impressive. I left Laconia with an application for the Community Scholars Program and a strange fluttering in my chest that I eventually recognized as excitement. For the first time in decades, I was contemplating a future based entirely on my own interests and abilities, not as an extension of someone else's life. That evening, I sat in what had once been Mercer's study but was now becoming my workroom. I had replaced his heavy wooden desk with a delicate writing table I found in storage, positioned to catch the afternoon sunlight. The bookcases no longer held his academic tomes on preservation techniques, but my collection of medieval literature and poetry that had previously been relegated to a back corner of our library. I opened my laptop, a recent purchase as Mercer and I had always shared a computer, and began updating my curriculum vitae. It was a sobering exercise. After my marriage, my academic accomplishments were sparse. A few book reviews in literary journals, an occasional article in non-academic publications. My knowledge had remained current through reading and independent study, but I had no professional credentials to show for the past several decades. After an hour of staring at the glaring gaps in my professional history, I closed the laptop in frustration. Who was I kidding? The academic world had advanced light years since my graduate studies. What could I possibly offer to today's students or scholarly discourse? As if sensing my distress, the telephone rang. It was Eleonora. Mom, are you okay? You sound strange. I hadn't realized I'd answered the phone with such a disheartened tone. I'm fine, Ellie. Just wrestling with some old regrets. What kind of regrets? My youngest had always been the most emotionally perceptive of my children. I found myself explaining about Laconia College, the Community Scholars Program, and my disillusionment upon confronting my abandoned academic career. So apply, she said simply. Ellie, be realistic. I haven't been in academia for 60 years. My dissertation is probably gathering dust in some forgotten archive. Actually, she said, her voice brightening, it's been digitized. Dahlia looked it up for a project on feminist literary criticism last year. Did you know you're cited in several contemporary works on gender in medieval literature? I nearly dropped the phone. That's impossible. Why? Because you decided you weren't important when you married Dad? Mom, other people didn't get that memo. Your work stands on its own. After we hung up, I returned to my laptop with renewed determination. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing my application, updating my knowledge of recent scholarship in my field, and reconnecting with the intellectual passion that had defined my youth. Whether accepted or rejected, the process itself became a kind of reclamation of my mind, my scholarly identity, my autonomational self. During this period, Practical matters continued to unfold. The divorce proceedings advanced, with both legal teams working toward an equitable division of assets. Mercer, initially combative, had become increasingly conciliatory as the weeks passed. Perhaps Octavia wasn't proving to be the perfect partner he had imagined. Perhaps the reality of dismantling a 60-year marriage was more emotionally taxing than he had anticipated. Or perhaps, and this thought gave me a fleeting, petty satisfaction, he was discovering that life with a woman 45 years his junior presented its own challenges. I learned through Thaddeus, who had reluctantly agreed to have lunch with his father, that Mercer was finding Octavia's downtown loft somewhat cramped for his extensive collection of books and research materials. He had mentioned, apparently with no sense of irony, that he missed his study at Thornfield House and the careful organizational system I had maintained for his academic papers. I told him he should have thought about that before running off with his physiotherapist, Thaddeus reported, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. He didn't appreciate that observation. I couldn't help but smile at my son's loyalty, though I gently discouraged him from antagonizing his father. Your relationship with him is separate from what happened between us, I reminded him. Don't damage it on my account. It's not just on your account, Mom, Thaddeus replied, his expression darkening. It's the principle. The man spent my entire childhood lecturing me about responsibility and commitment. He practically disowned me when I got divorced after 3 years. Now he's abandoning his wife of 60 years, and I'm supposed to pretend that's not the height of hypocrisy? I placed my hand over his. People are complicated, Thad, your father included. The man who raised you with those values is the same man who's currently living with Octavia. Both versions are real. My evenings often found me in the garden, which had become my sanctuary. Mercer had never shown much interest in this space, considering gardening too impractical an endeavor for a serious academic. As a result, it was perhaps the one area of Thornfield House that had always been truly mine. Now, I expanded it, adding a small meditation area beneath the wisteria arbor and a cutting garden that supplied fresh flowers for every room in the house. One such evening, as I was deadheading roses in the golden hour before sunset, the garden gate creaked open. I turned, expecting to see one of my children or perhaps the neighbor's cat that occasionally wandered through. Instead, I found myself face to face with a stranger, a woman in her late 30s, stylishly dressed in linen trousers and a silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. "Mrs. Thornfield?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor. I knew immediately who she was, though we had never met. Something in her posture, the combination of confidence and uncertainty, reminded me of myself at that age, navigating unfamiliar social waters. "You must be Octavia," I said, setting down my gardening shears and removing my gloves. "This is unexpected." She shifted uncomfortably. "I apologize for coming unannounced. I debated calling first, but I thought you might refuse to see me." "You're probably right," I acknowledged. "Why are you here?" Octavia glanced around, as if seeking an escape route. "I'm not entirely sure. To meet you, I suppose. To see if you're the monster Mercer makes you out to be when the lawyers send another letter." I couldn't help but laugh. "And am I?" She studied me with genuine curiosity. "You don't seem monstrous. You seem formidable." At 83, I'll accept that as a compliment. I gestured toward the garden bench. "Would you like to sit, since you've come all this way?" We sat side by side, an awkward silence stretching between us. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me, offering garden hospitality to the woman who had upended my life. "He's not happy," Octavia finally said, staring at her hands. "I thought you should know that." "And you came to tell me this." Because I thought it would give you satisfaction," she admitted. "And because I'm trying to understand what I've gotten myself into." I considered this unusual confession. "If you're seeking my blessing or absolution, I'm afraid I can't offer either. No, that's not it. She turned to face me directly. When Mercer and I when we became involved, he painted a very specific picture of your marriage. Cold, loveless, more business arrangement than relationship. He said you were brilliant but frigid, that you'd been living separate lives for decades, staying together only out of habit and convenience. I absorbed this description of myself, this stranger Mercer had invented to justify his betrayal. And you believed him. He's a very convincing storyteller, she said with a bitter smile. He described you as this emotionally unavailable intellectual who never understood his passion or supported his vision. He said you'd be relieved when he finally left. Yet here I am, distinctly unrelieved, I observed dryly. Exactly. And now that I've seen how you handled things, the financial maneuvers, keeping the house, the way your children have rallied around you, I'm beginning to see discrepancies in his narrative. I studied this young woman, younger than my children, wrapped up in a situation far more complicated than she had likely anticipated. Part of me wanted to enlighten her, to share 60 years of history she couldn't possibly understand. Another part wanted to send her away, to preserve whatever dignity remained in this undignified situation. Why did you come? I asked again, more gently this time. Octavia looked out over the garden, bees buzzing lazily among the lavender. Last night, Mercer mentioned that the Harbor Springs cottage would likely be sold as part of the divorce settlement. He seemed particularly upset about this. When I asked why it mattered so much, he said it was where your daughter Eleonora came out to you both, where your son recovered after his divorce, where you celebrated his retirement. He said it held the history of your family. She paused, emotion making her voice unsteady. And I realized, sitting there in my cramped loft with his books piled everywhere, and his complaints about the lack of proper storage, that he never once mentioned those memories when we were discussing our future together. He talked about academic legacy and global travel and cultural preservation, but never family memories or emotional milestones. Those aren't the things that initially attract people to Mercer, I said carefully. His brilliance, his vision, his passion for his work, those are what draw people in. The other parts, his capacity for tenderness, his dry humor, his occasional profound insights into human nature, those reveal themselves more slowly, and only to those who stay. Will those parts ever reveal themselves to me? She asked, vulnerability plain on her face. I felt a surprising rush of compassion for this woman, caught in a web partly of her own making, but also spun from Mercer's midlife crisis and fear of mortality. I can't answer that, I said honestly. Mercer and I built something over 60 years that was uniquely ours, with all its flaws and strengths. Whatever you build with him will be different. Maybe better in some ways, certainly worse in others, but it won't be comparable. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. Then she reached into her bag and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. I found this in Mercer's desk at the university. I think it belongs here with you. She handed it to me and stood to leave. Thank you for not having me thrown out of your garden. That would have required more energy than I care to expend on this situation, I replied, but softened it with a small smile. After she left, I carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small, worn book, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets that Mercer had given me during our courtship. I had inscribed the inside cover with lines from Sonnet 116. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. How young and idealistic I had been, believing love was immutable, permanent, a fixed star rather than a living thing that could grow or wither depending on its care. I placed the book on my bedside table, a relic from another life. That night, I dreamed of our early years together. Mercer and I walking across the Briarcliff campus in autumn, leaves crunching beneath our feet, the future stretching before us like an unopened gift. I woke with tears on my cheeks but a curious lightness in my heart. The past remained beautiful despite the present's complications. This, too, was a kind of freedom, to cherish what had been good without allowing it to shackle me to what had soured. The next day brought news that would accelerate my transformation. I received an email from Cordelia Winters at Laconia College, informing me that my application to the Community Scholars Program had been accepted. Furthermore, she had a specific request. Would I consider leading a seminar on women's voices in medieval literature during the fall semester? The previous instructor had taken a last-minute sabbatical, and my expertise would be invaluable. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Me, teaching again after all these years? The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. My immediate instinct was to decline, to protect myself from potential failure, from the humiliation of being intellectually outdated, from the judgment of students young enough to be my great-grandchildren. But then I thought of that young woman who had once been offered this possibility and turned it down for the sake of someone else's dreams. What would she say to me now? What would she want for her future self? I clicked reply and typed 2 words, I accept. The summer passed in a blur of preparation. I immersed myself in contemporary scholarship, updating my knowledge and familiarizing myself with current academic discourse. I developed a syllabus that bridged traditional and modern approaches to medieval texts. I practiced using the digital teaching platforms that had replaced chalkboards and overhead projectors since my last classroom experience. Throughout this period, the divorce proceedings continued. Mercer and I communicated primarily through our attorneys, though occasionally I received brief, stiffly formal emails from him requesting access to specific books or research materials still at Thornfield House. I always accommodated these requests, arranging for items to be gathered and left in the foyer for him to collect when I was out. Neither of us seemed eager for another face-to-face encounter. One such collection day in late August, however, our paths unexpectedly crossed. I had planned to be at Laconia College for a faculty orientation, but returned home early when the session ended sooner than anticipated. As I pulled into the driveway, Mercer's car was just leaving. Our eyes met through the windshields, a brief, charged moment of recognition before he accelerated past me. I found the foyer empty. He had taken the materials left for him. But on the hall table was something that hadn't been there when I left. A small wooden box I recognized immediately. It was a keepsake box Mercer had carved for me during our first year of marriage when we could afford few material gifts. Inside had always been the most precious mementos of our life together. The children's first teeth, hospital bracelets from their births, pressed flowers from significant anniversaries, small handwritten notes we had exchanged over the years. I opened it with trembling fingers, half expecting to find it empty, a symbolic return of our shared memories. Instead, nestled among the familiar keepsakes was a letter addressed simply, Winnie. I recognized Mercer's handwriting, though it had grown shakier with age. The letter was neither apology nor justification, but something more complex. He wrote of random memories that had been surfacing, my expression when I saw Thornfield House. For the first time, the way I had organized a surprise birthday dinner for him on his 50th. How I had sat with Imogen all night when she had pneumonia as a child, reading Tolkien aloud until dawn. These moments keep returning to me, he wrote, as persistent as the tide. I don't know what to do with them. They don't change the present, but they refuse to be denied. He concluded with a postscript that caught in my throat. The work you're doing at Laconia, Thaddeus mentioned it. It suits you. It always would have. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the box. There was a time when such an acknowledgement would have meant everything to me. Validation that my sacrifices had been seen, my potential recognized. Now, it was merely one voice among many, and no longer the one that mattered most. The leaves were beginning to turn when I stood before my first class at Laconia College. 12 graduate students and 4 advanced undergraduates who regarded me with the polite curiosity reserved for novelties. I had chosen to wear a deep, blue dress that Imogen had helped me select, with comfortable but stylish shoes and a simple silver pendant that had been a gift from Eleonora. My silver hair was freshly trimmed in a modern bob inspired by Cordelia's style. I looked, I hoped, like someone with authority and relevance, not a relic from another era. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Professor Thornfield, and this is Women's Voices in Medieval Literature." For the first 20 minutes, I was painfully self-conscious, aware of every hesitation in my speech, every moment when modern academic terminology didn't come naturally to my lips. But gradually, as I began discussing Christine de Pizan's The Book of the City of Ladies, something shifted. The material itself, so familiar, so beloved, carried me forward. I found myself moving away from my prepared notes, speaking instead, from 6 decades of accumulated knowledge and reflection. A young woman with bright green hair raised her hand. "Professor, do you see Christine's work as proto-feminist, or is that an anachronistic reading influenced by our contemporary understanding of gender politics?" The question was sophisticated, challenging, exactly the kind of inquiry that made teaching worthwhile. As I formulated my response, drawing on both historical context and theoretical frameworks, I felt a door opening inside me, a passage to a self I had set aside long ago. By the end of the 2-hour seminar, the students were engaged in a lively debate about authorial voice and historical context. As they gathered their belongings, several lingered to ask follow-up questions or recommend recent articles they thought might interest me. One student, a serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses, approached my desk last. "Professor Thornfield, I wanted to tell you, I read your dissertation while preparing for this course. Your analysis of Marjorie Kempy's autobiography was revolutionary for its time. It's an honor to study with you." I managed to thank him without revealing how deeply his words affected me. As he left, I remained seated, overcome by a complex emotion I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until I was driving home, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the road, that I recognized it. Pride. Not the reflected glory of being Mercer Thornfield's wife, not the secondary satisfaction of supporting someone else's achievements, but direct, unmediated pride in my own intellectual contribution to the world. That evening, I sat in my garden as twilight descended, watching the first stars appear. 60 years ago, I had made choices that shaped the course of my life. Choices that privileged love and family over professional ambition. Choices that reflected the values and expectations of my generation. I couldn't go back and unmake those choices, nor would I want to erase the family and experiences that had resulted from them. But here, in the autumn of my life, I had been granted an unexpected season of renewal. The woman I might have been hadn't disappeared after all. She had been waiting patiently, gathering wisdom, biding her time until I was ready to reclaim her. As darkness fell completely, I made my way back into Thornfield House. My house now, arranged according to my preferences, filled with my chosen belongings, echoing with my own rhythms. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, straight-backed, clear-eyed, a woman coming into focus after decades of being slightly blurred around the edges. "There you are," I whispered to my reflection. "I've been looking for you." Autumn settled over Laconia with a painter's precision, maples blazing crimson, oaks burnished gold, the air crisp as a fresh-picked apple. My seminar on medieval women's voices quickly became the highlight of my week. The students, initially skeptical of this professor emerita with her antiquated references and formal diction, had warmed to my approach. We developed a rhythm, these young scholars and I, a multi-generational dialogue that bridged 6 centuries of women's writing with 60 years of my lived experience. "Professor Thornfield," called out Zara, the green-haired student who had challenged me that first day. "I've been thinking about your interpretation of Julian of Norwich's All Shall Be Well as radical optimism in an apocalyptic age. Couldn't we argue that's precisely what we need in our current climate crisis? A theological framework for hope despite evidence to the contrary?" Such questions invigorated me, forcing connections between medieval thought and contemporary concerns I might never have considered on my own. Teaching, I discovered, wasn't merely the transmission of knowledge but a continuous reinvention of it. Ideas reborn through fresh perspectives, ancient texts illuminated by modern insights. After class one October afternoon, Cordelia invited me to join the faculty gathering at Blackwood Pub, a tradition I had thus far avoided. "You can't hide in that Victorian mansion forever," she teased, helping me gather my materials. "Besides, the medieval studies cohort wants to pick your brain about Hildegard of Bingen's musical compositions." The old Winnie would have demurred, citing household responsibilities or fatigue. But the woman I was becoming recognized the invitation for what it was. Not an obligation, but an opportunity. An hour later, I found myself at a corner table surrounded by colleagues decades younger, engaged in a spirited debate about female mysticism while nursing a glass of Pinot Noir I would never have ordered in Mercer's company. He had always insisted I stick to white wine, claiming red made me argumentative. Hildegard wasn't just documenting divine visions, I argued, surprising myself with my vehemence. She was creating intellectual space for women's spiritual authority in a system designed to exclude feminine perspectives. Her weakness was strategic, a rhetorical device that allowed her to speak truth without threatening male ecclesiastical power. "Feminist subversion avant la lettre," agreed Professor Harlow from Religious Studies, raising his glass in salute. These evenings became a regular fixture in my reinvented life. I discovered I enjoyed academic debate untethered from the careful deference I had shown Mercer's opinions for decades. I learned I could hold my own with scholars half my age, that my outdated classical training provided historical context their specialized education sometimes lacked. Most surprisingly, I found I had a talent for bridging interdisciplinary gaps, translating concepts across academic divides, just as I had once translated between Mercer's abstract intellectual pursuits and our children's concrete needs. November brought the first snow and an unexpected invitation. Lysander Hall, Laconia's cultural centerpiece, was hosting a medieval music and poetry symposium. The organizing committee, hearing of my presence on campus, had asked if I would introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Helena Rousseau from the Sorbonne, a leading authority on troubadour poetry. "They want me?" I asked Cordelia in disbelief when she delivered the request. "Don't act so surprised," she replied. "Your reputation precedes you. Apparently, Dr. Rousseau cited your dissertation in her groundbreaking work on female troubadours. She specifically requested to meet you." The news left me momentarily speechless. My dissertation, that earnest, ambitious project completed, before marriage had redirected my energies, had continued its own journey through academic circles without me. The thought was both gratifying and melancholy. What might I have contributed to my field had I followed that path? What conversations might I have joined? What discoveries shared? Such questions served no purpose except to divide my attention between regretful past and possible future. Instead, I focused on crafting an introduction worthy of Dr. Rousseau's accomplishments. I spent hours in Laconia's library researching her contributions to medieval studies, taking notes with the same meticulous care I had once applied to organizing Mercer's research materials. The evening of the symposium arrived with a theatrical flourish of swirling snowflakes. Imogen insisted on driving me, concerned about road conditions. "Are you nervous?" she asked as we approached the illuminated facade of Lysander Hall. "Terrified," I admitted. "It's been 60 years since I addressed an academic audience." "You'll be magnificent," she said, squeezing my hand. Dad always said you were the truly gifted public speaker in the family. He said his colleagues were always more impressed by your dinner conversation than his formal presentations. This revelation startled me. Mercer had never expressed such an opinion to me directly. In fact, he had gradually excluded me from academic gatherings as his stature grew, claiming I would find them tedious or too specialized. Had he feared comparison? Had my unfiltered intellectual engagement embarrassed him? These questions, too, I set aside for another time. Lysander Hall hummed with anticipation as scholars, students, and community members filled its jewel-box auditorium. In the green room, I met Dr. Rousseau, a formidable woman in her 60s with sharp eyes behind stylish frames and an elegant French scarf draped just so. "Madame Thornfield," she exclaimed, clasping my hands warmly. "What an honor to finally meet you. Your analysis of female agency in courtly love poetry fundamentally altered my understanding of medieval women's literary contributions." "You're very kind," I replied, somewhat overwhelmed by her enthusiasm. But my work was preliminary at best, and woefully uninformed by later discoveries. "Nonsense," she insisted. "You identified patterns that subsequent research has only confirmed. Your methodological approach was decades ahead of its time. When I discovered your dissertation hadn't been followed by further publications, I actually wrote to Briarcliff University inquiring about you. They informed me you had left academia for family reasons." "I married," I said simply. Something in Dr. Rousseau's expression suggested she understood all that remained unsaid. The choices of my generation, the compromises deemed necessary, the dreams deferred in service to others' ambitions. "Well," she said briskly, "academia's loss was undoubtedly your family's gain. But I am delighted to see you have returned to us. Better late than never, non?" When I took the podium minutes later, scanning the expectant faces in the audience, a strange calm descended. These were my people, lovers of language, caretakers of cultural memory, seekers of forgotten voices. I had been one of them from the beginning, though circumstances had led me along a different path. "Distinguished guests, faculty colleagues, and students," I began, my voice gaining strength with each word. "It is my profound honor to introduce Dr. Helena Rousseau, whose pioneering work on female troubadours has transformed our understanding of women's literary production in the Middle Ages." The introduction flowed naturally, my academic vocabulary returning as if it had never lain dormant. As I outlined Dr. Rousseau's contributions to the field, connecting them to broader currents in medieval scholarship, I felt a dormant part of myself fully awakening. The young scholar I had been, the professor I might have become, the intellectual I had always remained beneath the roles of wife and mother. Dr. Rousseau's lecture was brilliant, weaving together literary analysis, historical context, and musical demonstration. During the reception afterward, we found ourselves surrounded by students and faculty eager to continue the discussion. Dr. Rousseau generously deflected several questions to me, acknowledging my expertise in areas that intersected with her own research. For 2 hours, we engaged in the kind of vibrant academic exchange I had witnessed at conferences Mercer attended, but rarely participated in myself. "Professor Thornfield," ventured a doctoral student as the evening wound down, "would you consider serving on my dissertation committee? My research focuses on embodiment in women's mystical writings, and your perspective would be invaluable." Before I could respond, Dr. Rousseau interjected, "You would be fortunate indeed to secure Madame Thornfield's guidance. Her insights on Marjorie Kemp's physicality anticipated contemporary theoretical frameworks by decades." I felt a flush of pleasure at this professional validation. "I would be honored," I told the student, "though I should warn you my feedback may reflect somewhat outdated methodologies. Traditional close reading combined with historical contextualization is hardly outdated," Dr. Rousseau scoffed. Sometimes the newest approaches involve rediscovering the value of established methods. As the event concluded, Dr. Rousseau pressed a business card into my hand. "I am assembling a volume on overlooked female voices in medieval literature," she explained. "Would you consider contributing a chapter? Perhaps expanding your original analysis of Marjorie Kemp to incorporate more recent scholarship?" The invitation left me momentarily speechless. Publish? At my age? After 6 decades? Away from formal academic discourse? "I'll need to think about it," I said honestly. "Of course," she nodded. "But not too long. The academic world has waited 60 years for your return, Madame Thornfield. We are impatient to hear what you have to say." Driving home through gently falling snow, Imogen could barely contain her excitement. "Mom, did I hear correctly? Did Helena Rousseau just invite you to contribute to her book?" "She did," I confirmed, still processing the reality of it. "That's extraordinary. Are you going to do it?" I gazed out at the transformed landscape, familiar streets rendered new by their blanket of white. "I think I might," I said slowly. "I think I just might." The possibility of academic publication created a new center of gravity in my days. Each morning found me in my study, no longer Mercer's space but truly mine, surrounded by books, academic journals, and printouts of recent scholarship provided by Cordelia. I reread my dissertation with a blend of tenderness and critical distance, recognizing both its youthful insights and its analytical gaps. I drafted outlines, discarded approaches, explored new connections between medieval texts and contemporary feminist theory. This immersion in intellectual work provided welcome distraction from ongoing divorce proceedings. My attorney, Rhiannon, had become increasingly concerned about Mercer's delay tactics. "He's dragging his feet on the financial disclosures," she explained during our monthly meeting, "and he's challenging the property assessments, claiming Thornfield House has been significantly overvalued." "Why would he do that?" I asked, puzzled. "The house's value affects both our interests equally." Rhiannon's expression was carefully neutral. "From what I understand, his financial situation may have become somewhat constrained." "Meaning?" "Meaning the lifestyle he's established with Ms. Renweller may be more expensive than anticipated. Private physiotherapy practices require substantial startup capital, and real estate in the downtown arts district isn't cheap." I absorbed this information with surprising detachment. There had been a time when Mercer's financial difficulties would have automatically become my problem to solve. Budgets to adjust, economies to implement, reassurances to offer. Now, his challenges belonged to him alone. This separation, this clear delineation between his life and mine, was perhaps the most profound change the divorce had wrought. December transformed Thornfield House with holiday preparations. For the first time, I decorated according to my own aesthetic preferences rather than preserving the traditions Mercer had inherited from his family. Out went the formal evergreen, garlands with their precisely spaced red velvet bows. In came wild arrangements of holly, pine, and winter berries gathered from my garden. I replaced the solemn nativity scene, hand-carved in Germany, a gift from Mercer's mother, with a collection of whimsical woodland creatures I'd always secretly admired in local craft shops. Imogen noticed the changes immediately when she arrived to help prepare for our Christmas Eve gathering. "Mom, you've never liked those fussy garlands, have you?" she asked, helping me arrange twinkling lights around the sunroom windows. "Not particularly," I admitted. "They seemed appropriate for a university administrator's home, which is what your father needed our house to be." She paused, a strand of lights dangling from her fingers. "You know, I never realized how much of our family life was built around Dad's preferences and requirements. It was just normal, the way things were. It was the way most marriages functioned in my generation," I said. "Men's careers were considered primary, women adapted. But you had your own intellectual gifts, your own potential career." I secured a pine bough with floral wire before responding. I made choices, Imogen. I won't pretend they were forced upon me. I wanted a family. I loved your father. I valued what we built together. And now? I considered the question carefully. Now I'm discovering there are chapters of my story that remain unwritten. That's neither tragedy nor triumph, simply the unexpected gift of this late-life upheaval. Christmas Eve brought my first holiday as a single woman in 60 years. Thaddeus arrived first, stamping snow from his boots, arms laden with gaily wrapped packages. Eleonora and Dahlia followed with their twins, now teenagers engrossed in their phones, but willing to be coaxed into helping arrange the hors d'oeuvres. Imogen, Stellan, and their 3 children completed our circle. The celebration felt different without Mercer's commanding presence, less formal, more spontaneous. Conversation flowed in unpredictable directions rather than being subtly guided, toward topics he found intellectually stimulating. We played charades after dinner, something he had always considered frivolous. The children persuaded me to try their video game, laughing uproariously at my clumsy attempts to navigate virtual landscapes. Mom's avatar keeps walking into walls, Thaddeus chuckled, watching over my shoulder. Give Grandma a break, Eleonora's daughter Maya defended me. She's new to this. You should have seen me when I started. I'm quite hopeless, I agreed cheerfully, handing the controller to Maya. But it's rather exhilarating, isn't it? Even failure can be entertaining when you're trying something new. After the younger children had been tucked into guest rooms and the older ones retreated to the basement media room, the adult family members gathered in the sunroom with glasses of port. Another departure from tradition, as Mercer had always insisted Christmas festivities conclude with his preferred brandy. Should we call Dad? Thaddeus asked suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. It feels strange, him not being here. An awkward glance circulated among my children. They had each maintained contact with their father to varying degrees, but holiday arrangements had clearly been complicated by the divorce. I learned Mercer was spending Christmas with Octavia at her parents' home in Michigan, a detail my children had been reluctant to mention. Of course you should call him, I said firmly. He's your father. This separation is between him and me, not him and you. Imogen retrieved her phone and dialed, putting the call on speaker. Mercer's voice filled the room, familiar yet somehow distant, like music from another era. Merry Christmas, Dad, my children chorused. Merry Christmas, all of you, he replied, his tone warming. How is everyone? Are you at the house? They took turns updating him on their lives, sharing anecdotes from the evening's festivities. I excused myself quietly, giving them privacy for this conversation. In the kitchen, I busied myself preparing a pot of spiced tea, trying not to eavesdrop but catching fragments nonetheless. Eleonora's promotion, Thaddeus's new relationship, Imogen's eldest son's college applications. Then, unexpectedly, I heard my name. Mom's doing really well, Dad, Eleonora was saying. She's teaching at Laconia College and working on a book chapter for some famous French professor. A pause, then Mercer's voice. I'm not surprised. She always had a remarkable mind. I hope she knows that His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. I carried the tea tray back to the sunroom just as they were saying goodbye. An undercurrent of emotion lingered in the air. Not quite tension, not quite sadness, but a complex mixture of familial bonds and divided loyalties. Well, Thaddeus said brightly, accepting a cup of tea. That wasn't nearly as awkward as I feared. He sounded good, Imogen offered tentatively, watching for my reaction. I'm glad, I said, meaning it. Whatever had fractured between Mercer and me, I didn't wish him unhappiness. 60 years of shared history created connections that even betrayal couldn't entirely sever. Late that night, after the house had fallen silent, I sat alone in the library, watching snow accumulate on the windowsills. My first Christmas Eve without Mercer since 1963. Strange how absence could be so palpable. Not just his physical absence, but the absence of anxiety about meeting his expectations, ensuring his comfort, anticipating his needs. In that absence, I was finding room to expand, to reclaim aspects of myself long subordinated to marital harmony. January brought renewed energy to the divorce proceedings. Mercer, apparently tiring of legal maneuvering, finally provided the financial disclosures Rhiannon had requested months earlier. The documents confirmed what she had suspected. His investments with Octavia's practice had depleted his liquid assets considerably. He was now proposing a settlement that would allow him to access a portion of my inheritance from his father, the separate account that had served as my financial safety net. He has no legal claim to those funds, Rhiannon assured me. They were specifically left to you, not to the marriage. I understand, I said, studying the proposed terms. But if I agree to this modification, would it expedite the final divorce decree? Almost certainly. He's indicated as much. I considered the options carefully. Prolonging the legal battle meant continuing to live in limbo, neither fully married nor fully divorced, unable to complete my transition to independence. The funds Mercer requested represented perhaps 15% of my separate assets, significant, but not devastating to my financial security. Let's counter with 10% instead of 15%, I decided, and stipulate that this concludes all financial claims between us. I want this finished, Rhiannon. I want to move forward. She nodded, making notes. I'll draft the counterproposal immediately. Moving forward meant embracing new challenges alongside new freedoms. My chapter for Dr. Rousseau's volume was taking shape. My analysis of Marjorie Kemp's bodily agency and spiritual discourse evolving to incorporate contemporary feminist theory while remaining grounded in close textual reading. The writing process rekindled intellectual muscles long unused but not atrophied. Analytical skills I had employed throughout my marriage, though often in service to Mercer's work rather than my own. February found me in Laconia's Special Collections Library, examining a rare facsimile of the Book of Marjorie Kempe. My research assistant, the serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses who had approached me after that first seminar, carefully turned the pages as I took photographs with my tablet, a technology I had mastered with considerable pride. "Professor Thornfield," he said hesitantly, "may I ask a personal question?" "You may ask," I replied, smiling. "I reserve the right not to answer." "Why did you leave academia? Your early work was so groundbreaking. You could have had an extraordinary career." I considered how to respond to this young man who saw my life through the lens of contemporary choices and expectations. In 1964, I didn't perceive it as leaving academia so much as choosing family. There seemed no viable path to have both. Not for women of my generation, not without exceptional circumstances or exceptional support. But surely your husband, as an academic himself, could have understood the value of your work, could have supported your career alongside his? His innocent assumption that mutual support between spouses would have been the natural expectation revealed the vast cultural shift that had occurred within my lifetime. How could I explain the unquestioned primacy of men's careers in my era? The assumption that women's professional ambitions were secondary, expendable, easily sacrificed on the altar of family harmony? The world was different then, I said simply. The choices available to women were more constrained, the consequences of defying expectations more severe. I don't regret the path I chose. It gave me 3 remarkable children and many years of what I considered a successful partnership. He nodded thoughtfully. And now you're reclaiming your academic identity. That's pretty inspiring, if you don't mind my saying so. I don't mind, I assured him, touched by his earnestness. Though I'm not sure I'm trying to be inspirational, so much as authentic. At 83, I've earned the right to discover who I am when I'm not defined primarily through my relationship to others. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from Octavia Renweller. The subject line was simply consultation request, but the message itself was more personal. Mrs. Thornfield, I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out in my professional capacity as a physiotherapist. I understand from our previous conversation that you have arthritis. I've recently developed a specialized therapy program for seniors with joint inflammation, combining traditional physical therapy with gentle yoga techniques. I'm seeking experienced feedback before launching the program more broadly. Would you consider participating in a 4-week trial? The sessions would be complimentary, of course. There would be no need to interact with Mercer, as these sessions would be conducted at my satellite office near Laconia. Please consider this a professional invitation with no underlying agenda. Respectfully, Octavia Renweller. I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Was this a genuine professional outreach or something more complicated? An olive branch, perhaps? Or was Octavia seeking some form of absolution through professional service? The arthritis in my hands had indeed worsened over the winter months, making writing increasingly uncomfortable. Conventional treatments had provided limited relief. But could I separate Octavia the physiotherapist from Octavia, the woman who had upended my life? After careful consideration, I decided that maintaining artificial divisions between the personal and professional served no one. Octavia was both a skilled healthcare provider and the catalyst for my marital dissolution. I could acknowledge the former without absolving the latter. Ms. Renweller, I wrote in response, thank you for your professional outreach. I would be interested in learning more about your program. My schedule at Laconia allows for Tuesday or Thursday afternoon appointments. Please advise which would be more convenient for your satellite office operations. Regards, Winifred Thornfield. Our first session occurred on a blustery February afternoon at a small professional building near the Laconia campus. Octavia greeted me with professional courtesy, showing no signs of discomfort at our unusual situation. Thank you for agreeing to participate, Mrs. Thornfield, she said, leading me to a sunlit therapy room. I've developed this protocol specifically for arthritis sufferers over 70, focusing on maintaining mobility without exacerbating inflammation. For the next hour, she guided me through gentle stretches and specialized hand exercises, demonstrating techniques to reduce morning stiffness and increase range of motion. Her expertise was evident, her manner professional and respectful. Whatever complicated emotions might exist between us remained unacknowledged as we focused entirely on the mechanical challenges of aging joints. As I prepared to leave, however, the professional veneer cracked slightly. Mrs. Thornfield, Octavia said, her voice less assured than during our session, I want you to know that things with Mercer aren't. Well, they aren't what I expected. I paused in donning my coat. Few things in life are, Ms. Renweller. That's a lesson that comes with experience. Octavia's therapy sessions provided unexpected benefits beyond the physical relief they offered my arthritic hands. Each Tuesday afternoon, our professional relationship gradually evolved into something more nuanced than therapist and patient, yet less fraught than romantic rival and wronged wife. We developed a cautious rapport, our conversations initially limited to physiological matters but eventually expanding to include her research on aging and mobility, my academic work at Laconia, and occasionally, obliquely, Mercer. The techniques we're using today are adapted from research I conducted for my doctoral dissertation, Octavia explained during our 4th session, guiding my hands through a series of gentle stretches. I specialized in geriatric rehabilitation, with a focus on maintaining independence through targeted mobility interventions. Your dissertation, I mused, working through the exercises. When did you complete it? 3 years ago. It's what brought me to Briarcliff University. They have an excellent aging studies program affiliated with the medical center. I absorbed this information, recalibrating my perception of her. Not just a homewrecker or a youthful distraction for an aging academic, but a scholar in her own right, with professional accomplishments and intellectual passions. The realization didn't diminish her role in my marital dissolution, but it added dimensions I had previously ignored. "And how did you meet Mercer?" I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider its wisdom. Octavia's hands stilled, momentarily. She seemed to weigh her response carefully. "He was referred to me for shoulder inflammation, repetitive strain from archival work. During our sessions, he became interested in my research. He said it aligned with his concerns about maintaining cognitive function as he aged." She resumed guiding my fingers through their range of motion. "He began attending my departmental lectures, offering insights on incorporating preservation techniques into adaptive equipment designs. One conversation led to another." She trailed off, perhaps sensing that I didn't need the romantic details. What struck me was how familiar the pattern sounded. Mercer discovering someone whose work complemented his own, whose intellectual energy reinvigorated his thinking, whose admiration nourished his ego. It was precisely how our relationship had begun 6 decades earlier when I was the young scholar whose passion for medieval literature had sparked his interest. "History repeats itself," I murmured. Octavia glanced up, her expression questioning. "Nothing important," I said. "Just an old woman's observations." As winter mellowed into early spring, my life settled into new patterns. Monday and Wednesday. Mornings found me at Laconia College, teaching my graduate seminar and holding office hours in the small but pleasant space Cordelia had arranged for me. Tuesday afternoons were devoted to Octavia's therapy sessions. Thursdays, I worked on my book chapter, which had expanded beyond its original scope and now threatened to become a short monograph. Weekends often brought family visits, sometimes individual children with their specific concerns and joys, sometimes multi-generational gatherings that filled Thornfield House with the chaos I had once feared would disrupt Mercer's concentration. Throughout this period, the divorce proceedings advanced toward their conclusion. Mercer accepted my counter-proposal regarding the financial settlement, perhaps recognizing it as the most expedient path forward. In early March, Rhiannon informed me that we had a court date for the final decree, April 15th, ironically, the same date Mercer and I had married 61 years earlier. "Are you sure you're comfortable with that timing?" she asked, sensitive to the potential emotional impact. "It seems fitting," I replied. "A symmetry that appeals to the literary scholar in me. Beginnings and endings on the same date." The morning of April 15th dawned clear and mild, cherry blossoms framing the courthouse steps in delicate pink clouds. I had chosen my outfit carefully, not the somber attire one might expect for such an occasion, but a sage green suit that brought out the hazel in my eyes, paired with a vintage brooch that had been a gift from my mother, not from Mercer. Imogen accompanied me, her presence a quiet ballast against the emotional crosscurrents of the day. When we entered the courthouse, Mercer was already waiting in the hallway outside the assigned courtroom. He stood as we approached, his posture carrying the slight stoop of advanced age that had become more pronounced in recent months. Without Octavia beside him, he seemed diminished somehow, not just physically, but in some essential vitality. For a moment, looking at this man I had known for over 6 decades, I felt a complex surge of emotions. Lingering hurt, fading anger, unexpected compassion, and beneath it all, a kind of tender recognition of our shared human frailty. "Winnie," he said, his voice subdued, "you look well." "As do you, Mercer," I replied, professional courtesy masking deeper currents. Imogen embraced her father briefly, then excused herself to make a phone call, tactfully giving us a moment of privacy before the proceedings began. 61 years, Mercer said softly when she had gone. It would have been 61 years today. Yes. He searched my face, perhaps looking for recrimination or bitterness. Finding neither, he continued, "I want you to know that whatever mistakes I've made, and they have been numerous and significant, I never regretted our marriage. Those years weren't false, Winnie. They weren't a mistake. I considered his words carefully. They weren't a mistake, I agreed. They were a chapter, an important, defining chapter in both our lives. But not the entire story. A small, sad smile lifted the corners of his mouth. Always the literary scholar, seeing life in terms of narrative. It's how I make sense of the world, I acknowledged, through structure and meaning. We fell, silent as Imogen returned, followed shortly by Rhiannon and Mercer's attorney. The divorce proceedings themselves were brief and anticlimactic. A few formal questions, signatures on final documents, the judge's perfunctory ruling. After 60 years of shared life, our legal separation was accomplished in less than 20 minutes. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, Mercer touched my arm gently. "Winnie, would you consider having lunch, for old time's sake? There are things I'd like to say that don't belong in a courtroom." Imogen raised her eyebrows, silently questioning whether I wanted her to intervene with some convenient excuse. But I found myself nodding. "All right, Mercer. Lunch would be acceptable." We chose a small cafe near the courthouse, one neither of us had frequented during our marriage. Neutral territory, free from the weight of shared memories. After ordering a niçoise salad for me, French onion soup for Mercer, we sat in awkward silence. 6 decades of conversation suddenly evaporated. "How are your classes going?" he finally asked. "Thaddeus mentioned you're quite popular with the graduate students." "They're kind to humor an old woman's antiquated methodologies," I said with a self-deprecating smile. "But yes, the teaching has been more rewarding than I anticipated, and my chapter for Helena Rousseau's book has expanded considerably. She's suggested I develop it into a separate monograph." "You always were brilliant, Winnie," he said quietly. I sometimes wonder if I was afraid of that. The statement hung between us, more revealing than perhaps he had intended. Had he sensed, even in our early years, that my intellectual capabilities might rival or even exceed his own? Had that awareness influenced his subtle discouragement of my academic pursuits? "Fear shapes many of our choices," I offered, neither accusation nor absolution, but something in between, an acknowledgement of human complexity. Our food arrived, providing a welcome distraction from emotional undercurrents. As we ate, Mercer gradually revealed the purpose of this lunch. Octavia had accepted a prestigious research position at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. She would be leaving in June to establish her laboratory and clinical practice there. "I've decided not to accompany her," he said, studying his soup as if it contained hidden messages. "At 85, another major relocation seems unwise." "I see," I said carefully. "And how does Octavia feel about this decision?" "She understands. The position is a significant career advancement for her. I would only be a complication, a responsibility." He paused, then added with uncharacteristic vulnerability, "The age difference that once seemed irrelevant has become increasingly apparent. Her life is still expanding. Mine is inevitably contracting." I felt an unexpected surge of empathy for this man who had hurt me so deeply. After 6 decades believing he was the center of my universe, he was learning the humbling lesson that he might be peripheral to someone else's. "What will you do?" I asked. "Will you return to Briarcliff?" "No," he said firmly. "Too many complications there as well. I've been offered a visiting scholar position at Emeritus College in Harbor Springs. It's modest, but includes housing in their faculty retirement community." I thought, well, it's near our cottage, near where we spent all those summers. Our cottage, now legally mine alone, though I had yet to visit it since the separation. A small property on Lake Michigan, where we had escaped the academic pressures each August, where our children had learned to swim and sail, where we had hosted countless family gatherings over the decades. Harbor Springs holds many memories, I said neutrally. "Yes." Mercer hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic directness. "Winnie, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wonder if you might consider selling me the cottage. Not as part of the divorce settlement. That's finalized now. But as a separate transaction. It would give me a sense of continuity, I suppose. A connection to our family history. I studied him across the table. This man I had once known better than I knew myself, now almost a stranger. His request surprised me not in its substance, but in its emotional transparency. The Mercer of our marriage would have approached such a matter strategically, perhaps enlisting the children as intermediaries or framing it as the obviously sensible solution. This direct acknowledgement of emotional need was unfamiliar. "I'll consider it," I said, not making promises. "I haven't decided what to do with the cottage myself. I haven't been back since. Well, since before." He nodded, accepting this non-commitment with more grace than I expected. We finished our meal discussing safer topics: Imogen's eldest son's college acceptance, Eleonora's recent research grant, Thaddeus's new relationship with a cellist from the City Symphony. For a brief interlude, we were simply the parents of adult children, sharing updates and mild concerns as we had done countless times over the decades. When the check arrived, Mercer insisted on paying, a gentlemanly gesture that would once have seemed natural, but now carried complicated implications. I allowed it, recognizing it as perhaps the smallest form of restitution for all he had taken from me. As we parted on the sidewalk outside, he hesitated, clearly uncertain about the appropriate goodbye for this unprecedented situation. I solved the dilemma by extending my hand formally. "Goodbye, Mercer. I wish you well in Harbor Springs." He took my hand between both of his grip surprisingly strong despite his age. "Goodbye, Winnie. He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. Finding none, he simply said, "Thank you for lunch, and for 60 years. I watched him walk away, his tall figure moving slowly through the dappled shade of spring trees. For a moment, an unexpected wave of grief washed over me, not for the marriage I had lost or the betrayal I had suffered, but for the simple passage of time, the inevitability of endings, the bittersweet reality that nothing, not even 6 decades, of shared life, lasts forever. When I returned home, I found a package waiting on my doorstep, a book-sized parcel wrapped in brown paper and addressed in Mercer's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a first edition of Christine de Pizan's The Book of the City of Ladies in the original Middle French, a rare volume I had admired but never owned. The inscription read simply, "To Winnie, your City of Ladies awaits its newest resident. With respect and regret, Mercer." The gift brought tears to my eyes, not because it erased the hurt or justified his actions, but because it acknowledged, however belatedly, my intellectual identity separate from our relationship. It was a recognition of the scholar I had been before him and was becoming again after him. That evening, I sat in my garden as twilight gathered, Christine's words on my lap, my thoughts drifting between past and future. 61 years ago today, I had stood before an altar and pledged my life to Mercer Thornfield, believing our story would follow a prescribed arc. Youth, maturity, gentle decline, hands clasped until death parted us. How stunned that bride would have been to glimpse this future: divorce at 83, academic rebirth, a house remade in her own image. Yet, in another sense, perhaps that young woman would recognize this elder self more clearly than the dutiful faculty wife I had become. In the intervening decades, the passionate scholar who had challenged conventional readings of medieval texts, who had dared to center women's voices in her analysis, she might well applaud this late-life return to intellectual engagement. Spring unfurled across Laconia, with emphatic beauty, magnolias erupting in plate-sized blooms, forsythia tracing yellow exclamation points along garden borders, tulips standing at attention in formal beds. My days followed their now established rhythm of teaching, writing, and therapy sessions with Octavia. The difference was in my legal status, no longer Mercer Thornfield's wife, but simply Winifred Thornfield, independent entity, author of my own story. During our final therapy session before her departure for Minnesota, Octavia and I achieved a kind of closure neither of us had anticipated. After completing the prescribed exercises, she handed me detailed instructions for continuing the regimen independently. "Your progress has been remarkable," she noted, professional pride evident in her tone. "Many patients half your age show less commitment to their rehabilitation." "I've discovered I have a vested interest in maintaining manual dexterity," I replied. "My writing has become quite important to me." She hesitated, clearly weighing her next words carefully. "Mrs. Thornfield, Winifred, I want to thank you for your graciousness these past months. Most women in your position would have refused to work with me under any circumstances." "Most women in my position don't have arthritis quite this stubborn," I said lightly. Then, more seriously, "Your professional expertise has been invaluable. I'm able to separate that from our complicated personal connection." Octavia nodded, accepting this compartmentalization. "I understand you're aware that Mercer won't be joining me in Minnesota." He mentioned it, yes. "What you may not know is that I was the one who suggested we separate." She straightened her desk, aligning pens and notepads with precise movements. "When Mercer and I began our relationship, I believed I was strong, enough to manage the complexities involved, the age difference, the professional complications, the family dynamics. But I underestimated the emotional toll of becoming the other woman in a 60-year marriage." I remained silent, listening without judgment as she continued. The reality of what I'd participated in became increasingly difficult to reconcile with my own values. Seeing Mercer interact with his children, watching him navigate the divorce proceedings, hearing stories about family history I could never be part of, it was like living in the shadow of a massive institution I'd helped dismantle without fully appreciating its structural significance. Her metaphor struck me as particularly apt. Our marriage had indeed been an institution, not just a relationship between two people, but a complex system with its own traditions, languages, and cultural artifacts. Its dissolution affected not just Mercer and me, but an entire ecosystem of family connections and shared histories. "Minnesota offers a fresh start," Octavia concluded, "for both of us." "I hope you find what you're looking for there," I said, meaning it sincerely. Whatever role she had played in my marital breakdown, she was also a talented professional with her own path to follow. "Your patients will benefit from your expertise." As I prepared to leave, she handed me an envelope. "This might seem strange, but I wanted you to have this. It's a letter of recommendation for a colleague of mine in Laconia who specializes in hand therapy for writers and artists. If your symptoms flare up again, she's excellent." The gesture touched me, practical, professional, and oddly personal all at once. "Thank you, Octavia. I appreciate your thoughtfulness." With May came the end of the academic semester and a surprising invitation from Helena Rousseau. "I'm organizing a medieval literature symposium in Paris this summer," she explained during our video call. "Given the excellent progress on your monograph, I wondered if you might consider presenting a portion as a featured address. The timing is quite fortuitous. The first week of July coincides with an exhibition of Christine de Pizan manuscripts at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Paris. In my youth, I had dreamed of studying there, of examining medieval manuscripts firsthand, rather, than relying on facsimiles and transcriptions. But life had intervened. Marriage, children, Mercer's career priorities. I had visited Paris only twice, both times accompanying Mercer to conferences where my role had been primarily social. The charming faculty wife who could converse in passable French with colleagues' spouses, while the serious academic discussions occurred elsewhere. I haven't presented at an academic conference in over 60 years, I reminded Helena. And never at an international symposium. All the more reason to accept, she countered with Gallic practicality. Your perspective bridges generations of scholarship in a way no other presenter can offer. Besides, the medieval studies community is eager to welcome you back to its ranks. The invitation sparked both excitement and trepidation. Could I, at 83, embark on such an adventure alone? Would my French, rusty from disuse, prove adequate for professional discourse? Would my physical stamina support the rigors of international travel and conference participation? These questions might once have seemed insurmountable barriers, but the woman I was becoming had developed a different relationship with uncertainty, seeing it not as a warning to retreat, but as an invitation to expand. I would be honored to participate, I told Helena, my decision crystallizing even as I spoke, though I may need some accommodation for my arthritis during the longer sessions. Her delighted response confirmed I had made the right choice. After our call, I sat in my study, mentally cataloging the practical arrangements such a trip would require. Passport renewal, my last one had expired years ago, appropriate academic attire, transportation considerations, medication management. The logistical challenges were considerable but not prohibitive. When I shared my plans with my children during our Sunday dinner, their reactions ranged from Thaddeus's enthusiastic, "Rock on, Mom," to Imogen's concerned questions about travel insurance and accessibility. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Eleonora asked. "One of us could accompany you. Dahlia and I could make it a vacation." "I appreciate the offer," I said sincerely. "But this is something I need to do independently. It's not just about presenting research. It's about reclaiming a professional identity I set aside 60 years ago." They exchanged glances, communicating in that wordless sibling language they had developed in childhood. Finally, Imogen spoke for all of them. "We support whatever you decide, Mom. Just promise you'll call if you need anything. Anything at all. Day or night, whatever time zone you're in." Their concern touched me, but so did their respect for my autonomy. They were adjusting to this new version of their mother, not just the nurturing presence who had anchored their childhoods, but a woman with her own ambitions and agency. Later that week, as I worked through the preliminary steps for international travel, I received an unexpected email from Mercer. Harbor Springs was experiencing an unusually warm spring, he reported. The faculty cottage at Emeritus College was comfortable, though somewhat sterile. His health was stable, his work on manuscript preservation techniques progressing slowly. Then came the real purpose of his message. "The cottage needs attention, Winnie. I drove by yesterday and noticed the lakeside steps are deteriorating, a safety hazard if anyone should visit. The property management company you've engaged appears to be neglecting basic maintenance. If you're still considering selling, I'd be interested in discussing terms. Alternatively, if you plan to use it this summer, I could arrange for repairs through my local contacts." His concern about the cottage seemed genuine, but I detected an underlying strategy as well, creating a shared problem that would necessitate ongoing communication, maintaining a connection despite our legal separation. The old Mercer, using practical matters to advance emotional agendas. I crafted a measured response, thanking him for the information and indicating I would contact the property managers directly. As for the cottage's future, I concluded, I'm still considering options. I'll be traveling to Paris in July for an academic conference, so any decisions will likely wait until my return. His reply came within hours, unusually prompt for someone who had often taken days to respond to family communications during our marriage. He expressed admiration for my conference participation and offered unsolicited advice about accommodations in the Latin Quarter. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Paris in July. We always talked about spending a summer there after retirement, one of many plans that remained unrealized." The implied regret was palpable, though whether for the missed opportunity to visit Paris or for the larger failures of our marriage remained ambiguous. I chose not to engage with this emotional undercurrent, responding only to his practical suggestions about Parisian hotels with polite thanks. As spring mellowed toward summer, my preparation for the symposium intensified. I revised my presentation, incorporating feedback from Cordelia and refining my analysis of Marjorie Kempy's strategic deployment of feminine weakness as rhetorical strength. I practiced delivering key sections, working to strike a balance between academic precision and engaging presentation. I renewed my passport, arranged for travel insurance, and meticulously planned my itinerary with attention to physical limitations I would once have been too proud to acknowledge. Throughout this process, my mind occasionally drifted to the cottage on Lake Michigan, its weathered dock where the children had learned to dive, its stone fireplace that had warmed countless family gatherings, its screened porch where Mercer and I had spent quiet evenings watching sunsets paint the water in impossible colors. Should I sell it to him, as he requested? Should I keep it for family gatherings, creating new memories without him? Should I sell it to an unrelated party, making a clean break with that chapter of my life? The cottage represented something different from Thornfield House. Not the stage for our daily married life, but a space of concentrated family connection, annual traditions, and rare moments when Mercer had set aside academic concerns to be fully present with us. Its emotional significance transcended its modest physical attributes. One evening in mid-June, as I reviewed my presentation notes on the garden terrace, Imogen called with unexpected news. "Mom, have you spoken with Dad?" "Recently? Not for several weeks," I replied. "Why?" She hesitated. "Thaddeus visited him yesterday in Harbor Springs. Apparently, Dad had some kind of minor cardiac event last week. Nothing serious," she hastened to add, "but enough that his doctor has restricted his activities." "I see," I said, processing this information. "Is he receiving appropriate care?" "Yes, the faculty retirement community has good medical support. But Thad said he seemed diminished somehow, more fragile than when you saw him at the divorce proceedings." After we hung up, I sat watching fireflies emerge in the deepening twilight, my presentation forgotten. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and pain and legal dissolution of our bond, the thought of Mercer facing health challenges alone affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. Not because I wished to resume a caretaking role, that chapter was definitively closed, but because 60 years of shared life creates connections that transcend legal status or romantic attachment. The following morning, I made a decision about the cottage that surprised even me. I contacted my attorney and instructed her to draft a formal agreement. I would retain ownership, but grant Mercer lifetime usage rights, with the property ultimately passing to our children upon both our deaths. It wasn't the sale he had requested, but it offered the continuity he sought while preserving the property's family legacy. "Are you certain about this arrangement?" Rhiannon asked. "It's somewhat unusual." "So is divorcing after 60 years, I replied. "Sometimes conventional solutions don't fit unconventional situations." As June stretched toward July and my departure for Paris approached, I found myself considering what lay beyond the symposium, not just my return to Thornfield House and my fall teaching schedule at Laconia, but the broader landscape of this unexpected final chapter of my life. At 83, I harbored no illusions about unlimited horizons. Time was a finite resource, more precious now than ever. What did I want from these remaining years? What experiences had I deferred? What aspects of myself had I neglected? What connections did I wish to nurture or repair? The answers emerged, gradually, like photographs developing in solution, some clear and sharp, others still forming. I wanted to complete my monograph on Marjorie Kempy. I wanted to continue teaching, guiding young scholars through texts that had sustained me through 6 decades. I wanted to visit the medieval libraries of Europe while I still had the energy for such adventures. I wanted deeper relationships with my grandchildren, understanding them as emerging adults rather than extensions of their parents. And, perhaps most surprisingly, I wanted to find a way to honor the 60 years Mercer and I had shared without allowing that history to constrain my present or future. Not reconciliation, that door had closed decisively with his betrayal, but a kind of peaceful coexistence that acknowledged both the pain inflicted and the life created together. The evening before my departure for Paris, my children organized a small gathering at Thornfield House, a combination bon voyage celebration and early birthday observance, since I would turn 84 while abroad. As we enjoyed dessert on the terrace, Thaddeus raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he began, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Who taught us that it's never too late to rewrite your own story?" "To new beginnings," added Eleonora. "And to Paris," concluded Imogen with a warm smile. "May it be everything you dreamed and more." I looked around at these extraordinary adults my children had become, successful in their careers, thoughtful in their relationships, resilient through life's inevitable challenges. Whatever mistakes Mercer and I had made in our marriage, whatever opportunities I had sacrificed along the way, this outcome, these three remarkable humans, seemed worth every compromise. "Thank you," I said simply, raising my own glass in response, "for supporting this unexpected journey." Later, as the gathering wound down and preparations for departure consumed our attention, Imogen drew me aside. "Dad asked me to give you this," she said quietly, handing me a small, carefully wrapped package. "He said it's for your birthday, but he wanted you to have it before you left for Paris." I accepted it with mixed emotions, setting it aside to open in private after my family departed. When the house had finally quieted, I sat in my study and carefully removed the wrapping. Inside was a velvet jeweler's box containing an antique silver bookmark, its design an intricate rendering of a medieval illuminated manuscript page. Accompanying, it was a note in Mercer's increasingly shaky handwriting. "Winnie, I found this in an antiquarian shop in Harbor Springs and thought of you immediately. May it mark not just pages, but moments in this new chapter you've begun with such courage." The bookseller informed me it dates from the 1920s, created for the centenary of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. It seemed fitting to choose a gift that honors both your scholarly passion and the truth Keats identified. Beauty is truth. Truth. Beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Safe travels to Paris. The medieval studies world is fortunate to welcome you back to its ranks. Happy birthday. Mercer. I traced the delicate silver work with my fingertip, moved despite myself by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the literary reference, a nod to our shared intellectual foundation, the common ground that had first drawn us together all those years ago. Not an attempt to reclaim what was lost, but an acknowledgement of what had been meaningful in our shared past. I placed the bookmark carefully in the copy of Christine de Pizan I planned to bring to Paris, a tangible connection between past and present, between the young scholar I had been and the elder scholar I was becoming. Then I finished my packing methodically, preparing for the journey that would begin at dawn. As I moved through these practical tasks, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if the fragments of identity I had been gathering since Mercer's departure were finally cohering into a new whole. Not the unblemished potential of youth, nor the compromised self of midlife, but something more complex and valuable. A self tempered by experience, liberated by loss, expanded by reclamation. At 83, standing on the threshold of a journey I could never have imagined a year earlier, I was becoming more fully myself than I had been in decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. That Mercer's betrayal, intended or not, had catalyzed this unexpected renaissance. The painful ending of one story had created space for another to begin. As I turned out the lights and prepared for a few hours' rest before my early departure, I paused in the doorway of what had once been our bedroom and was now definitively mine. The antique mirror on the dresser caught my reflection. Silver, hair neatly styled, posture straight despite the years, eyes clear and direct. I smiled at this elder self, this woman emerging from the shadows of supporting roles into the spotlight of her own making. Paris awaits, I whispered to my reflection. And beyond that, who knows? Paris embraced me with unexpected familiarity, as if the city had been waiting all these years for my return. The July sunshine gilded ancient limestone facades, cast long shadows across cobblestone streets, and warmed cafe terraces filled with animated conversations. From my small hotel in the Latin Quarter, chosen for its proximity to the Sorbonne where the symposium would be held, I could hear the distant bells of Notre Dame marking the hours, a timeless rhythm connecting medieval past to vibrant present. My presentation was scheduled for the second day of the conference. The evening before, I sat in a small courtyard restaurant with Helena Rousseau and several distinguished medieval scholars, picking at my coq au vin while anxiety fluttered in my chest. Would my research hold up under scrutiny from these formidable intellects? Had I been foolish to think I could step back into academic discourse after a 60-year absence? You seem pensive, Winnie, Helena observed, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Are you concerned about tomorrow? Terrified might be more accurate, I admitted with a small smile. It's been decades since I presented original research to an audience of peers. Professor Edmundo Garcia from Barcelona University leaned forward, his expression kind. I read the abstract of your presentation. Your analysis of Marjorie Kempy's strategic deployment of feminine weakness is brilliant, particularly your connection to contemporary feminist theory without anachronistic impositions. We are eager to hear more. His words calmed me somewhat, as did the genuine interest I saw in the faces around the table. These scholars weren't humoring an old woman or extending professional courtesy to a colleague's widow. They were engaging with my ideas on their merits. That night, in my hotel room overlooking a quintessentially Parisian courtyard, I made final preparations for my presentation. As I arranged my notes, my fingers brushed against the silver bookmark Mercer had sent. That tangible link between my past and present selves. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and composed a brief message. Paris is everything I remembered and more. Presenting tomorrow morning. The bookmark is perfect for my conference materials. Thank you for the thoughtful gift. Winnie. His response came minutes later, despite the time difference. You'll be magnificent. You always were. 5 simple words, yet they carried complex resonance. Not an attempt to reclaim what was lost or deny the pain inflicted, but an acknowledgement of a truth that remained valid despite everything that had happened between us. He had seen and valued my intellectual capabilities, even if his actions hadn't always reflected that appreciation. The next morning, I stood before a packed lecture hall at the Sorbonne, sunlight streaming through tall windows as I adjusted the microphone. Looking out at the attentive faces, some young graduate students earnestly poised with notepads, some distinguished professors whose work I had been studying intensively for months, I felt a moment of pure clarity. This was where I belonged, where I had always belonged. Not exclusively, not at the expense of family or other aspects of identity, but as an essential expression of my authentic self. Bonjour et merci, I began, my French pronunciation returning more smoothly than anticipated. It is both an honor and a homecoming to address this distinguished gathering. My journey to this podium has been unconventional, a 60-year detour, you might say. But perhaps that perspective offers unique insights into our medieval subject. The presentation flowed naturally from that point, my nervousness transforming into energetic engagement as I outlined Marjorie Kempy's sophisticated negotiation of patriarchal constraints. When I finished 40 minutes later, the applause was gratifying, but the questions that followed were even more so. thoughtful, challenging inquiries that pushed my analysis in new directions and suggested future avenues for research. I responded, with growing confidence, the academic language that had once been my native tongue returning with each exchange. That afternoon, as conference attendees gathered for coffee in a sunlit courtyard, a young woman approached me, a doctoral candidate from Oxford whose question about embodied spirituality had been particularly insightful. "Professor Thornfield, I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said hesitantly. "But would you consider serving as an external reader for my dissertation? Your framework for analyzing female agency within religious constraints would be invaluable to my work on anchoresses." Before I could respond, another scholar joined us, then another, each with questions, collaboration proposals, or invitations to contribute to upcoming publications. By the end of the day, my professional dance card was filled with commitments extending well into the following year. A semester as visiting scholar at Cambridge, a keynote address at a specialized conference in Edinburgh, a contribution to a new critical anthology on medieval women's writing. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I sat by the open window watching Paris transform as darkness fell and lights illuminated monuments and ordinary streets alike. 60 years ago, when I had turned away from this path to follow Mercer's trajectory, I could never have imagined this moment, this late-life academic renaissance, this reclamation of professional identity after decades of subordinating it to family responsibilities. Yet I couldn't bring myself to regret those 60 years, despite their imperfect ending. They had given me 3 extraordinary children and 7 grandchildren. They had provided a lifetime of experiences that now informed my scholarship with perspectives unavailable to those who had followed more traditional academic careers. Even the pain of Mercer's betrayal had become valuable, stripping away illusions, forcing me to rediscover my essential self beneath accumulated layers of accommodation and compromise. On my final morning in Paris, I visited the Bibliothèque Nationale to view the Christine de Pizan exhibition. Standing before glass cases containing manuscripts the medieval feminist had penned with her own hand, I felt a profound connection across centuries to this woman who had also reinvented herself late in life, who had also found her voice after personal betrayal. At 84, I understood Christine's words with new clarity. The city of ladies is populated not just by women of the past, but by all who continue to claim their rightful place in the world, despite obstacles placed before them. Upon returning to Thornfield House, I found summer had transformed my garden in my absence. Roses spilling over trellises, hydrangeas unfurling massive blue and purple blooms, tomato plants heavy with ripening fruit. Life continuing its cycles, growth emerging from even brief neglect. My email inbox overflowed with messages from new colleagues, invitations to contribute to academic journals, and updates from my children. Among them was a brief note from Mercer, informing me that he had received the cottage usage agreement and expressing gratitude for the arrangement. "The doctors are cautiously optimistic about my cardiac condition," he added. "The lake air seems beneficial." I crafted a polite response, sharing highlights from the symposium without emotional flourishes. We had established a new communication pattern, cordial, occasionally touching on shared history but primarily focused on practical matters and separate lives. Not friendship exactly, but a civil aftermath to 6 decades of intimacy. It seemed the healthiest outcome possible from our fractured union. August brought familiar rhythms and new variations. I hosted a weekend gathering for my children and grandchildren at Thornfield House, enjoying their company without the pressure of meeting Mercer's exacting standards for household management. I continued work on my expanded monograph, incorporating feedback from symposium colleagues. I met with Cordelia to plan my fall seminar at Laconia, adding contemporary theoretical frameworks that had engaged my interest in Paris. At Imogen's insistence, I also scheduled quarterly checkups with my physician and a consultation with a retirement financial advisor. Practical considerations for this unforeseen chapter of independent living. "You need to plan for the long haul, Mom," she insisted. "You could have another decade or more of active life ahead." The possibility both startled and delighted me. Another decade. What might I accomplish, discover, experience in those years? What other aspects of myself remained to be reclaimed or reinvented? One evening in late August, as I sat in my garden, watching fireflies rise from the lavender beds, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Octavia, calling from Minnesota. "I hope I'm not intruding," she began awkwardly. "I heard about your successful presentation in Paris and wanted to offer congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "How is Minnesota treating you?" "The research facilities are exceptional," she said. "The sour climate will take some adjustment, but it feels right to be building something of my own." She paused before adding, "I've been thinking about our conversations during those therapy sessions, about choices and consequences. I wanted you to know that our interactions changed me, helped me recognize patterns I hadn't acknowledged in myself." The admission surprised me. "In what way?" "I've spent my life seeking validation from established authorities, mentors, department chairs, distinguished scholars. Mercer fit that pattern perfectly. But watching you reclaim your academic identity after 60 years showed me another path. One where external validation isn't the primary measure of worth." After we hung up, I sat with this unexpected insight. Had my late-life transformation actually influenced the young woman who had catalyzed it? The thought created a strange symmetry to our unusual connection. Each of us changed by the other in ways neither could have anticipated. As summer yielded to autumn, I found myself contemplating the cottage on Lake Michigan. I hadn't visited since before the divorce, but property management reports confirmed the repairs Mercer had mentioned were now complete. Perhaps it was time to reclaim that space as well, not by erasing its history or Mercer's current limited presence there, but by establishing new patterns and memories alongside the old. I'm thinking of spending a long weekend at Harbor Springs. Before the semester begins, I mentioned to Eleonora during our weekly call, "Would you and Dahlia consider joining me? The twins might enjoy the lake before the weather turns." "Really?" She sounded surprised. "With Dad being so nearby at Emeritus College. The cottage is large enough for us to maintain our separate schedules," I said. "And I think it's time I stopped allowing his choices to limit mine. Harbor Springs holds 60 years of family memories. Those belong to all of us, not just to him." After a thoughtful pause, Eleonora agreed. "You're right. The cottage is ours too, the good memories and the difficult ones. I'll speak with Dahlia and the kids." And so, on a crystalline September morning, I found myself driving the familiar route to Harbor Springs, Eleonora's family following in their own car. As we crested the final hill before the lake came into view, that breathtaking expanse of blue stretching to the horizon, I felt a surge of both nostalgia and possibility. This place had witnessed 6 decades of my life with Mercer. Now it would witness whatever came next. The cottage welcomed us with creaking screen doors and the persistent scent of pine and lake water that no amount of winter closure could eradicate. While the teenagers immediately raced to the dock to assess swimming possibilities, Dahlia organized lunch, and Eleonora checked the water heater. I stood in the sunroom, gazing out at the sparkling lake. So much had changed in the year since. Mercer had left. I had lost a husband but reclaimed a self, the scholar I had set aside, the woman whose needs and ambitions had been subordinated to family harmony. The pain of betrayal remained, a scar that would never completely fade, but it no longer defined my days or limited my horizons. At 84, I had discovered that endings often contain beginnings, that loss can create space for unexpected growth, that the story I had thought complete still had chapters waiting to be written. Not a fairy tale ending. I harbored no illusions about riding off into the sunset with a new companion or achieving global academic acclaim. But something more valuable. The quiet satisfaction of becoming more authentically myself with each passing day. Outside the window, I could see Eleonora and Dahlia setting up the old picnic table on the beach, laying out the colorful plates and mismatched glasses that had served countless family gatherings. The teenagers had found the collection of weathered kayaks stored beneath the deck and were arguing good-naturedly about who would take which one. Life continuing, adapting, creating new patterns from the threads of the old. I picked up my notebook, the one containing ideas for my next research project, and headed down to join them, stepping confidently into the next chapter of a story still very much in progress. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right? On your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.